Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for coming in this afternoon. Welcome. Um, a question I get asked quite often these days, and indeed a question that I ask my guests on my show practically every morning is investment in AI turning into a bubble? If it is not, then how do we assess the opportunities and therefore avoid the pitfalls? And if it is, then how do we make informed, maybe sometimes difficult decisions and avoid a downturn or a bubble burst? I don't have the answers to any of those questions. In fact, I'm still very much analog, as you can see. But I have an esteemed panel with me here who may have those answers. I will ask them. We will, over the next 30 minutes or so, we will discuss amongst each other the prospects, the growth prospects for the market, about the technology and its adoption as well. And also we'll talk about regulation and, very importantly, the ethics that are needed when leading in this industry. Of course, we will also talk about valuation and pricing in the current markets. So a recent report from Goldman Sachs found that sentiment towards AI has recently turned much more skeptical. Investors, leaders, business leaders who were quite enthusiastic, who are quite optimistic about AI, were turning a little bit not negative, but questioning, asking the question whether AI is at the moment, or the potential for it, has in fact been overstated. So the question to you, Gavin, is the promise of generative AI overblown?
I do not think so. I think when I was a young man, I was very sad that I had not been born during an age of exploration. That was very exciting to me. I think the odds are reasonably high, as long as I assess there's an 85% chance AI is good for humanity. And in that 85% world, I think I'm going to be able to live to be 200 or 300, see a blue sunset on Mars, and explore the Oort cloud, which is very exciting to me. From an investment perspective, I would say there's a massive bubble, from my perspective, at the application layer. I will just say in 2021, at the peak of the EV bubble, this is public, I posted on X that Rivian, which was valued at $150 billion, was almost certainly going to go to zero. Rivian is not zero, but it's close enough that it doesn't matter. You know, down 99% versus down 100%, let's not split hairs. I'm going to make a similar prediction. The only foundation model companies at the application layer that will have enterprise value in 5 years are Google, Meta, and xAI. The reason for this is it is very clear that these models are converging on a similar level of IQ, and then as scaling laws continue, if they continue, which is the most important question in the world, they will compound their IQ at about the same rate. So what is going to differentiate them? It is having access to unique data. The 3 companies that have unique data are Meta, Google, and xAI by virtue of its partnership with X. However, at the infrastructure layer, there is no bubble. I have been covering semiconductors for 25 years. The firm I worked at owned 15% of NVIDIA in the year 2000. I had the privilege of speaking to Jensen once a week. And in private markets, I think largely because many VCs are uncomfortable don't like the binary risk of semiconductors, private semiconductor companies that are essential to this AI revolution and will win no matter who wins at the application layer are trading at discounts to their public comps. So I think we have to bifurcate the answer between infrastructure and applications.
Absolutely, and that's where I would like to turn to you, Tim. Perhaps we can take a step back, and we've been talking about AI nonstop, I think, this afternoon, especially here in this building. Could you just break that down for us? What is AI, really? What are the layers?
Yeah, so, and Gavin highlighted the different components. The way I'll probably take a step back and just definitionally, for some people in the audience maybe less familiar, is kind of have the logic layer, so all the LLMs, think Anthropic or OpenAI. You have the infrastructure layer, so how do you manage your models, how do you manage inference, how do you manage compute, and then the application layer as well, so the products you're eventually putting in the hands of consumers. I tend to be very bullish on the application layer, specifically because of what's happening in the logic layer. So you look at OpenAI, ChatGPT 4 in March was about $36 per million tokens. And in September, it is 12 cents per million tokens. So you have a 300x price compression. And then additionally, the outputs that are coming out of the model, so ChatGPT 3.5, taking the law bar exam, scores in the 10th percentile in November of 22. In March of 23, you have ChatGPT 4 is released, and it's scoring in the 90th percentile. So what Gavin's obviously talking about scaling laws, both from a price compression perspective, as well as also from a logic perspective, makes me incredibly excited about the future of AI. But I think that at the logic layer, it is very, very hard to generate profits, just given how quickly pricing is compressing, and it's kind of and the outcomes are changing all the time. At the application layer, we're seeing both the intelligence and the business adoption, so and then also revenue and monetization from a lot of our companies. So one company going from 1 to 40 to 1 to 10 to 40 this year, another one going from 40 to 100 in ARR, 36 to 100. You're just looking at these massive growth rates that really haven't seen before. And then additionally, the TAMs that a lot of these applications are going after are quite larger. So there's a company in the audience basically selling to think kind of law firms. Typically, law firms would spend about $2,000 to $3,000 per employee on software. Now they're spending about $20,000 to $40,000 just because of the outcomes that this company is generating, where really they're seeing it as a replacement to additional headcount that they would need to scale. What they're doing is also they have such a backlog of injury law that is coming in. And so instead of just cutting heads, they're actually just massively increasing revenues. So a lot of people will say AI is just a cost mitigation. I think it's actually more of a productivity tool than anything. And then lastly, in terms of kind of valuations and winners, and touching on a lot of what Gavin talked about, I think power law is going to be even more magnified in AI. So obviously power law rules, which a lot of people likely understand, are roughly 60% of any one given market is going to be dominated by one player, or they'll have 60% market share. I think in AI that might be even more accelerated because of a lot of the data that these early entrants will get. Is so not just as you scale, you have more employees and more people in product who can develop better products, but also your data moats of you have early customers, you therefore get a bigger data corpus. You also have the end customers having human in the loop to be able to train a lot of these models, and then we'll create more of a data flywheel where the product will get that much better just based on having more customers and more data. And so that flywheel, I think, will continue to compound. And so I think you could look at higher than 60% adoption in any one given market. You obviously have to select well because there's so many companies in any given space. But if you do select right, I think there's large outcomes that can be had.
At almost every computing cycle that we have been through, there's always been this product that captured our imagination. And in between the build cycle and then the application, there's that time lag, and in that time lag, disillusionment kind of sets in. Is that what what is being felt at some point now? Anu, if I ask you, please, what are some of the cases that are working now in AI? We need evidence to know it's all happening.
I think that you asked a question at the start, which is it overblown? And I think it's important to acknowledge that the technology is not overblown and its impact is not overblown. Valuations in private market is overblown. And I think that's the difference. And I think it's driven by two things. We always overestimate the impact of a new technology in short term and underestimate the impact in 10 years, right? So what is working in AI today?
Yep.
So let's take coding, for example. I think you can talk to lots of engineers at startups. there is a huge improvement in productivity. I think most startups would tell you they see a 10 to 15% improvement in productivity with both GitHub Copilot using the underlying models such as Claude or OpenAI. But some teams have been able to optimize more on the model and have even seen 35% improvement in productivity. What that translates to is instead of having every PM having 9 engineers, you can keep the scope of the team as 6 engineers to a PM and still accomplish a lot more output. So that's working. That's not, a myth. Second, if you take legal, right, which we have Rami here in the audience, who's the founder of Even Up, but if you take legal or healthcare, specific use cases for legal discovery, you have usually law firms hire lots of interns to go through many documents. You can use foundation models today to take the first cut, go through the documents, and come up with a summary which is 80% correct. You need humans to correct and get it to 100, but an 80% correction from a system is really good, and it continues to improve as new models launch. Similarly, you see that in healthcare with claims management. You see that in customer success. So the use cases are absolutely real, and as the models evolve, more of these use cases will improve, and we will see that going forward.
Tony, thank you for joining us.
Sorry.
That's okay, I understand. It's too much traffic outside. We asked the question if the promise of AI is overblown, and Anu just made the point that the technology isn't, but the pricing, the valuations are.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're, like probably all of us, we're seeing, real world applications for the technology in lots of areas, some concentrated more, in customer service, as you mentioned, and we're seeing, even in the healthcare space, lots of, areas in opportunity for drug discovery that are next generation. But yeah, look, I think like most, points in history, having done this for a long time, there's points in time where, valuations get a little exuberant, and I think we're certainly seeing that today. But we, at the same time, recognize that many of these companies are growing faster and generating more revenue more quickly than many cycles we've seen before. So it just depends on the company specifically. And I think there's always a little bit of fear of missing out that comes into the points at these early points in the cycle, and I think that's happening now. But we're really encouraged. I mean, I think we at NEA focus on technology and healthcare investing. We have 550 active companies in our portfolio, and so we're seeing not only native AI opportunities for our new investments, but really compounding opportunities for our existing portfolio, companies that are using AI technology and applications and tooling to really change the arc of both the growth opportunity, TAM expansion, and in many cases drive efficiencies for margin improvement. So even in our existing companies that weren't AI native, we're seeing real tangible results.
Gavin, Sam Altman recently said that despite some challenges to building cheaper computers and some advanced infrastructure, we will get to superintelligence much sooner than we thought.
I think we will get to superintelligence much sooner than we think. I'm not sure Sam will get to superintelligence, lacking unique data. But I do think we're going to get to superintelligence quickly. I believe Elon predicted yesterday 3 years. I think 5 years is a reasonably safe prediction. But just on this discussion about the application layer, and I do think it's a good separation by Tim between logic and application, I would just say we're very early. So if ChatGPT was the Netscape Navigator or iPhone moment for AI, we're now 2 years past that moment. And in the 2 years post the introduction of Netscape Navigator, only 1% of current global internet market cap was founded. That's actually a statistic from Chase Coleman. But I think it kind of captures a profound insight. We're very, very early. And I think that's why it's so important to be really careful and discriminating at the application and logic layer. There's for sure FOMO. Our job as investors is to not give in to FOMO. Mm-hmm. If you gave in to FOMO in 2021, you went all in on crypto and application SaaS. Crypto's making a little bit of a comeback. Application SaaS, I think, is is done. I think fundamentally, a lot of application layer AI companies and all application software companies are bets against ASI. Artificial intelligence, these incredible growth rates you guys are referencing, is not coming. Those budgets are not coming from software budgets. They're replacing labor. And most application software companies, they sell on a per seat basis. That means per human basis. If there are less humans doing the work, revenues will shrink, and an ASI will look at Salesforce and say, why would I ever use something so clunky? Why would I ever engage with something like Workday? So I think we need to be very careful at the application layer, and at the beginning of any new true technology, the infrastructure layer is the safest place to be. And as I referenced earlier, it is the only place, particularly in semiconductors, where valuations are a discount to public comps.
Can I maybe take potentially the other side, which I don't know where the future is, but I think the argument against that could be the data that you had mentioned, particularly in highly regulated industries. Think law, think finance, think healthcare, think even anything around invoicing or contracts and stuff that's generally not scraped publicly available data, because one, purpose-built applications will be able to, or should be able to, have that within their MSAs to be able to train their own models that improve based on data. And then number two is the data flywheels that I had mentioned before, which is the product just gets better over time with the more data you have. And so theoretically, if you are an early entrant getting that data, then and you can start to capture more and more of the market, it then becomes that much harder for the next gen startup to come in.
Yeah.
I think it's a sensible argument that data moats can lead to regulatory capture, but I'll just never forget Eric Schmidt in 2005 or 6 discussing telecom companies and technologies everybody's forgotten about, like private networks, and he said, don't bet against the internet. And I'd say the same thing, don't bet against AI and generalized AI. But I do think it's sensible that data moats can lead to regulatory capture, but I would just say training your own model, good luck.
And I think you guys are highlighting an interesting debate that a lot of investors are having today, which is like, who ultimately, what's the long-term beneficiaries of the new companies, more native AI, or is the incumbents? And I think the good thing, whatever side of that you're on, to what Gavin was saying, is that this stuff just generally takes a lot of time. And large enterprises don't change overnight, whether they're adopting new technology or moving away from, and I think the companies that have those big install bases, going to have a lot of work to do to kind of really reinvent themselves. But either way, whatever ultimate outcome happens, it's going to take a long time.
Can I add one thing there?
Sure.
I know you all talked about data moats and startup versus incumbent, but I think we have a live example. OpenAI versus Google DeepMind. DeepMind existed for 10 plus years. They were the first to pioneer their research behind AGI. Yet, OpenAI leapfrogged them, was the first to launch ChatGPT, was the first to launch LLM, and it was an awakening for Google because they were so fixated on one thing. And I've spent time with the DeepMind team asking, how did you let OpenAI get ahead of you? And it was one thing, which is they thought that AGI can be built only by self-teaching. That's how intelligence is built, not by looking at other data or human intelligence and learning. So they vehemently disagreed, especially the top 3 people in the DeepMind research lab. And so what happened, OpenAI said, I think LLM is going to get us faster. And so they used the LLM approach. Google waited 1.5 years until ChatGPT was launched. Then they thought it was existential because they felt OpenAI is going to get all the consumers, they'll get more data, and the models would get smarter. So a startup moved faster, but Google decided to change their approach. They had a different team working on LLM, launched Gemini. Within 1.5 years, whatever benchmarks you see, they've caught up with ChatGPT.
I would just say, for sure, the launch of, I would say, ChatGPT was December 7th, 1941 for Google. And if you're not an American, that is Pearl Harbor Day. And Admiral Yamamoto made a famous prediction. He said, for 18 months, because we have surprised the Americans, I will give you an unbroken string of victories across the Pacific. But after that, we will never win again. And the steel mills of Detroit and the oil wells of Texas will defeat me. And Google has its own steel mills, and those are called TPUs, and they have their own oil, and that is the proprietary data they have in YouTube, which OpenAI stole, and I think it's going to be much more difficult to steal going forward. But for no question, that was Pearl Harbor Day at Google. At dawn, they slept.
Let me just take this in another direction. I would like to talk about a little bit about regulation and also the ethics that are necessary when developing or when leading in this market. Without mindful development, AI can become a limited resource that exacerbates inequality and conflict. You mentioned Eric Schmidt earlier. Yesterday, Eric Schmidt spoke during one of the main sessions of the application of AI in wars. He painted in wars, enabling gun operators to sit and sip their coffees in somewhere while their guns are shooting at each other in a battleground somewhere far, far away. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, later on in the day yesterday, posited that we need less of that sort of AI and more human intelligence to stop wars. Now, we live in an increasingly polarized and polarized world, that both politically and morally. What ethics do we need, Anu, to attach to adopting and or deploying AI?
Yeah, I would say, I think we're still scratching the surface in this, but I'll give you an example. Going back to Google, I've spent a lot of time with the DeepMind team asking you, I'm sure you have way more sophisticated models. For example, I know that they probably have a music model that can generate perfect music. Like if you say, sing me happy birthday in Elvis Presley's voice, but using this music, it can do it. It can do it perfectly well. But can they release it? It probably will be irresponsible to release it, because there is a moral authority on, does the artist own the voice? And now have I violated the artist, by releasing this, that someone can use it? Second, a lot of video models have not been released this year. Why? Because of the US election. It's really hard to catch all the fake videos that are being created using AI, even though they're working very hard to solve that. So I do think the moral responsibility is probably more, and the regulation will evolve over time, and we still haven't seen the full gamut of the use and of these applications. So I don't know the answer, but I do know there are people internally thinking about this.
Has anyone yet said that, oh yes, I know how this will pan out, I know how this will play out in the next 5-10 years?
If they are, they're an idiot. Nobody should have super high conviction about such a future with such a wide range of outcomes.
So you're quite bullish on this, and you've stated your case very clearly early on. Is there something that holds you back? What is the one thing that you're worried about?
So just no one on planet Earth knows how or why scaling laws work. There is a solid theoretical underpinning for Moore's law, which worked really well for 70 years, but theory underpinned that empirical observation. No such theory underpins scaling laws, which simply state that as we 10x the compute, we double the quality of an algorithm. In an LLM terms, that means we had 15 points of IQ. No one understands how or why that works. We'll get the first test of scaling laws, arguably since GPT-4, when Grok 3 completes training from XAI this December, because they have the biggest compute cluster in the world. But no one knows if scaling laws continue, the future is going to be wild.
Yeah.
And I hope it's a Star Trek future and not a Terminator future, to quote my friend Antonio Gracias. But it's going to be wild.
Tony, no one knows how the technology works. How do you know? How do you buy? How do you invest when you don't know?
Well, look, our job as investors is to sort of balance, that. And we, from an NEA perspective, Gavin mentioned some of our companies like the Salesforce, Workdays of the world. Many of these companies have decades of opportunity. And so we think about it, sort of near term. What are the companies that are actually have real world applications today? Ones that can do it responsibly, ones that have a business model or unit economics that make sense. But I think what Gavin said earlier is right. Like, I think we have time diversification in our mind in all of this. And, this is going to play out over a very long time. So our job is really to sort of make sure that we sort of take that, into consideration when we're investing. And so, we're moderating the places that we think have the nearest term application. We as a firm have avoided more the infrastructure, the kind of the deep infrastructure layer with data centers and all that stuff. We really believe that data infrastructure, the tooling layer that is going to be required to kind of then make the leap on the application side is really where a lot of the value is going to be created. But long term, we really believe then the application layer is the real value creation. So we're sort of being patient because a lot of that's going to play out over a long period of time.
Yeah. Tim? And maybe going back to the regulation point, I think a lot of the basically one worry I have is the more regulation you have, the more the ethics bar needs to increase, which it should. I worry that stifles innovation because that one, typically the people who write regulations are the incumbents. So if you take people from private enterprise, think of creating Obamacare. The woman from Epic, who was CEO there, would basically hand wrote it to make Epic that much more valuable and increase the bar so that startups effectively couldn't get into a lot of these spaces. And I'm worried that could play out into AI as well. And then additionally with ethics, yes, you should definitely have concerns and you should have a do no harm, but there will be potentially bias or edge use cases that you can't necessarily solve for. And if you're basically saying, hey, you need 20 or 30 person teams to mitigate a lot of that, then that could wipe out a lot of startups who would try to start with 3 or 4 person teams, and you just can't do that today.
To respectfully take the other side.
Which I love, by the way. So
yeah, same, Tim.
Yeah.
I love the
Just to let you,
yes,
just to let you know, we're in the last 5 minutes.
And I'm sure you've had these experiences talking to DeepMind. The closer you are to one of these AI labs, the more scared you are. Everyone at an AI lab, if you really ask them, what do you think the odds are that this is a real risk for humanity as a species? They say between 10 and 20%. So that means that the 400 people at these labs are playing Russian roulette with humanity. And there's a bullet in one chamber in the revolver, and there's awesomeness in the other 5 chambers. So I think there should be regulation as a human. This is not going to happen because the leading labs in America have very effectively weaponized fears of China moving ahead of America. So there's going to be no regulation, for better or worse. So let's just hope that the revolver comes up on one of the 5 awesome chambers, and we all get to live a long time and explore the OART cloud. But I do, and I do think we should credit Elon for being the only leader of a major lab to support the proposed AI regulations in California.
I mean, say there is regulation. Do you think the regulators would get it right? What's the probability of that?
I think there's a 0% chance they would get it right. I think they would just slow it down. So as someone who wants innovation, I don't want regulation. As a human, I'd rather have it happen slightly slower so we could take that 10 to 20% chance down to 0 to 5. And it is a little ironic. If any of you have seen Terminator, it's about weaponized robots. What the war in Ukraine has taught everyone is that the future of war is about drones. And at least in the Terminator movies, Skynet had to make the Terminators. Here, we have companies making the robot weapon systems for the AIs, turning over decision-making to the AIs, and it's a little crazy. But I agree, it would absolutely be bad for innovation, but I guess I'm a human first, investor second.
Okay.
We have 3 minutes, just under 3 minutes. I just want to ask you, we have a handful of tech stocks that have an uncommonly high share of market capitalization. At the same time, there are those questions about the AI story. Are we throwing money at AI like we did during the dot-com era? And which companies will stay? And what are the foundations of those companies that will stay? Just a quick comment from each one of you, please. Go ahead, Anu.
Yeah, I would say that, look, I think just the way the dot-com era had the internet bubble, but internet was real. It's not, I want to acknowledge that we have to acknowledge the technology use case is real. It really shifted the landscape. I think the nuance is you have to look at the different layers. So if you think about it, last year, I mean, the numbers vary depending on where you see, but let's say $40 billion went into AI. On some of the stats in 2023, 2/3 of that capital came from corporates into AI for AI funding for startups, right? And so I think that I'm more on Gavin's side. The infrastructure layer is real. I do think where I would differ, I'm not saying today, is it clear which application? It's not. But I do think AI will create new enterprise AI application companies. Here's why. You can have all the best models in the world, but if you don't have domain expertise on how a lawyer or a doctor or a customer success person uses the tool to make day-to-day decision. So workflow, UI, UX, and the right data to fine-tune your model, you don't have an enterprise AI application that can use the underlying foundation model. So I think you have to, and one of the companies that today I would say is really good that fits in that category is Glean, because they are essentially called the enterprise search, and they have strong integrations which give them a lot of moat that's able to surface the data within a company. So you really have to see where is the value, and there is opportunity there.
Okay. Tony?
Yeah, I mean, look, we don't play in the public markets too much, but I clearly the private markets are following the public markets in many ways right now again, which I think people lost, sort of forgot their lessons from the prior cycle. But look, I think, we're going to probably underestimate the number of really big market cap companies that can get created out of this cycle. I just think it's going to take a decade. It's not going to take the next 2 or 3 years. And, I think a lot of there's been a volume of capital more on the infrastructure side and things that are needed to power this next wave. And that makes a lot of sense. I think the return on capital in that area is going to come down a lot. And I think that's why corporates are playing in it. That's why large institutions are playing in it. It's a different business than sort of the venture capital world. But, I think people are paying forward pretty significantly. I think for us, we have a bit of a barbell. Closer you get the company formation, we think the more value you capture, and then more when the business is proven out. The middle part, that Series B to Series C stage, is where we see a lot of mispricing happening right now.
Thank you for that. Gavin?
So very quickly, most of what I do is actually public markets investing. I was an investor during the bubble. And in public markets, valuations are very different than the bubble. The largest tech companies during the bubble traded at over 100 times earnings. Google's up 6-7% today, trades at a high teens multiple. 80% discount to what comparable companies traded at during the bubble. So there's not a valuation bubble in public markets. And I will make another high confidence, testable prediction. I would say I'm strong opinion, slightly held. I'm always happy to change my mind when there's new data. But the internet has been all about increasing returns to scale. It's one reason Google and Meta and Apple and Amazon have become so large. AI supercharges all of that. So if you look at the aggregate market cap of what are called the Magnificent Seven, and that they've been the best investment anyone could have made for the last 15 years. They've outperformed the NASDAQ, they've outperformed venture, they've outperformed everything. It's been incredible. The aggregate market cap will continue to compound faster than most indices, and the aggregate market cap, which today is probably 10 to 12 trillion, will for sure go to 50 to 100 trillion. But 1 or 2 of those companies will go extinct. And the reason is, each member of the Mag 7, they were like Olympic athletes, and each one was the world champion and world record holder. But they competed in different events. Google was the best 100-meter sprinter in the world. Maybe Meta was the best tennis player. Now they're all competing in the same event, and it's called AI. And it's not a Game of Thrones, or to quote the TV series, you either win or die. And this one, you win, and you become worth tens of trillions because of ASI, or you die. So I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity.
So we should stop watching movies and TV, Gavin.
Well, I
Apparently.
think we're going to be able to have our own
Scare
movies
ourselves,
scripted for
yeah.
us
Yeah.
in the next 18 months.
Yeah. The only last thing I'll say is
Final.
I generally agree with the theme of I think the best companies and power laws and scaling laws will continue to persist, and the winners in big markets, whether it's people in the Mag 7 and they're all competing on AI, or in very small markets within various different verticals, those winners will probably capture a larger market share than the 60% that is currently average today for power law companies.
Thank you very, very much for all this. That's flashing at us, so we need to give it up here.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
all for
and thank you
attending.
to FII. Great job.
Okay.
Thank you.